Hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Taking Control of Your Diabetes podcast. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Jeremy Pettis, joined as always by my good friend and colleague,
Dr. Steve Edelman.
Now, Steve, we wanted to kick off the podcast reminding people that TCOID's mission is really to empower and educate you listening to take control of your diabetes so you can live a longer and healthier life.
Well, that's basically it, Jeremy. That's our mission statement. And I want to remind folks that we are on social media. We'd love if you could follow us, give us a little heart like signs. I know I love those hearts. And please visit our website with the Video Vault, where we have lots of excellent lectures, added a little humor to each one. So thank you for bringing that up, Jeremy.
Yeah. And also a reminder that everything we do is available completely for free, and it always will be. All right. Now, today's podcast is, a little different because it's not specifically about a topic, but it's about our experience, what we learned at a recent diabetes technology conference called the ATTD that took place just a couple of weeks ago. It was actually in Florence, Italy. So
yeah, it was in I believe its 18th year. It started off as a small meeting where all healthcare professionals and researchers, mostly pharmaceutical and device people, show up to talk about technology, and has evolved to mostly type 1 and now type 1 and type 2, as type 2s are using our technology. So it's probably one of my favorite meetings of the year. And what we try to do for you listeners is to go through the many lectures and pick out some of the most exciting bits of data. Yeah. And we will explain it in sophisticated lay terms. I should give a kudos to Kelly Close's organization, Close Concerns. She has a team of 20 very smart college kids that go around reporting and putting out an email on each day, which gave me the inspiration and the knowledge to put all this together.
Yeah. And so, it's like 3 or 4 days, all day long. So a lot of stuff going on. And I got to say, going to these conferences, and specifically this one, is one of my favorite parts of our job. Somebody's got to go to Florence, Italy, I guess. I've never been there. I know you have before, but it's fun to go there. It's fun to be around these other people that are doing kind of like-minded things and just talking about diabetes all day long. So the focus of the conference is really technology. So it has a type 1 slant to it, but there's a lot going on in type 2, so we're going to talk about both. So we've kind of broadly broken down the topics into new or updates in technology and then medications. So let's start with in the tech world. So these are in no particular order of importance or anything like that, just kind of what came up. So in technology, there's a crucial or a big announcement from Dexcom right when we were there. Do you want to tell people about that, Steve?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk, and lectures on CGM in type 2. So Dexcom was approved by the FDA for a particular pump called the Stelo. It's a pump particularly for people with type 2 diabetes not on insulin. It is going to be over the counter. It's a 15-day sensor with a 12-hour grace period, which is longer than the G7, just of note. And importantly, the system is contraindicated in individuals with problematic hypoglycemia. Now, if you're not on insulin, you shouldn't have that problem, but you could be on a sulfonylurea, which could cause hypoglycemia. And so they have basically, they're taking away any chance of having alarm fatigue.
Well, and so this is a big deal to get it over the counter. And as we're recording this, it hasn't hit pharmacies yet. Do you know, so it was approved. Do you know when this might actually happen, that somebody could just walk in their pharmacy and get it?
I do not, but just keep an eye out and it'll be there soon.
Yeah. And when I first heard this, I was like, wow, what a big change that people don't need a prescription for this. But then I kind of flipped my thinking and was thinking, why is this taken so long that people, need a prescription? You haven't needed a prescription for a glucose meter for decades. And, it's about time.
Jeremy, you don't need a prescription for a glucose meter. That gives you a blood sugar at one point in time, doesn't tell you where you're going, where you're coming from, no alerts and alarms. But to get something that is way more valuable to save your frickin' life and improve your diabetes, you have to get a prescription. And it has to do with pharmacy access. It's complicated, but it has taken a heck of a long time.
Yeah. So pretty soon, right next to the meters and the Prilosec, whatever we're going to see sensors, it's going to be awesome. So that is a big deal. So, and then Steve, you picked out this one study that was presented, which I thought was actually interesting. That was about, this is the G7 that we're talking about from Dexcom now, where it has a feature that I actually was completely unaware of. I've been using a G7 for quite a while, and it's called the Silence All feature. So we all know that you can set alarms on your CGM, your high alert, your low alert, but there is this little thing that you can go in under alerts, and you can say silence all, and you can pick how long you want all alerts to be silenced, up to 6 hours. So this is basically a complete leave me alone, even like urgent low, that kind of thing. And the study went through, how many people used it and what the results were if people did use it. Anything you want to say about that?
I would say one thing. Ever since I started using the G7 with my hybrid closed loop system, I have not played around with the phone app. It's quite different than the appearance of the G6. So, for example, I can get my clarity data on the G7 app that gives you your time and range and other information. You don't have to open up a second app. And I have to play around because I did not know of that alarm either. Now, how often would I use it? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But there are people that have reasons to use it that doesn't put them in safety's way, harm's way of getting a severe hypo. You follow me on my CGM. You do text me once in a while when I get to 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Otherwise
you for
you
that.
Get mad at me. But yet, this is some data. So it says overall 24%. This is a large kind of 106,000 people, these data of people using G7. And about a quarter of them, 25% of them, had used this silence all at least once. And when people did it, the vast majority of them did it like one session a week or less. So it's not like these people were using it, every day. But I think it's important, and they also importantly showed that there was no worse outcomes of hypoglycemia, of people having major issues that use this feature. So alarm fatigue is a real thing. If there's a time, they said actually was also interesting, is that this peaked in the evening, that, when people were eating dinner or after dinner to go to, bed, that people would use this. So it's just a way of saying, if this happens, where you really want to be left alone, you can not only silence your phone, but silence your CGM. I don't know. It's kind of a cool little thing.
Well, Dexcom has and the other CGM company have a huge database. And they even put out a little graph as part of their presentation. Like you mentioned, what time of day do they do it? So they really look at these. They don't have anybody's individual data, but they have, what they call big data, over 100,000 people.
So was this a blockbuster study? No, but it's kind of cool for the day-to-day of us dealing with these sensors. So next in tech. So obviously we have CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, and we've had them for a while. God bless them. Now what companies are working on are continuous ketone meters that you can actually use with your CGM. So it'd be a dual CGM, CKM. And as a reminder, what are ketones? Well, ketones are the things that get secreted in your body when you don't have enough insulin around, and they can actually, that's what causes DKA. The K in DKA is ketones, diabetic ketoacidosis. So most of the time, the vast majority of the time, these ketones aren't an issue at all. But, you want to be made aware if your ketones start going up to potentially prevent DKA. Maybe your pump infusion site fell out. Maybe you're sick. You want to know what your ketones are. There is a way now that very soon, Abbott is kind of leading the way, that will have a device that can measure this. Now, you're probably saying, I don't know what a normal ketone level is. I don't even, think I want to see this information all the time. And my understanding of this device is that it will show your glucose all the time, like you're used to. And the ketones you can kind of have on in the background, so you don't have to see that information. And it will automatically alert you if your ketone value goes over 1.5, which again, you're thinking, what does that mean? That is when it's getting to be a concerning level and telling you, hey, you're not getting enough insulin. You need to change your infusion site. You need to take an injection just to keep people safe. This also will be really important in terms of type 1s that eventually want to use SGLT2 inhibitors like Farxiga and Jardiance. The reason those medications are not approved in type 1s is because they have a higher risk of DKA. And the thought is that this could really kind of eliminate that, open up this valuable class of medications for us type 1s to take.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. to get a little scientific on all of you, there's a specific thing called beta hydroxybutyrate. That's the form of one of the ketone bodies. Right now, you cannot measure it in the urine with a urine stick, although there is a company working on that. And the only other way to get a measurement, you can get a handheld meter made by Abbott that measures beta hydroxybutyrate. And, who walks around with a meter that measures ketones?
Right.
And you mentioned the SGLT2 inhibitors like Farxiga, Jardiance, and we're going to talk a little bit about Lexicon's SGLT2 and 1 inhibitor. Their issue is euglycemic decay, so your blood sugars may be normal. You may feel badly. You never may put 2 and 2 together. And there are risk mitigation things you can do at home if you knew that your beta hydroxybutyrate was going up that could prevent an ER visit or hospitalization.
And DKA is still just upsettingly common. About 5% of type 1s will go to the ER every year with an episode of DKA. So this is a really, potentially effective tool to help keep type 1s and type 2s safe.
Yeah, and I'd say that the most common cause of DKA to type 1 is their pump line coming out.
Yeah. And then, something else happening too. And then they're sick or like something else. But yeah.
They get sick. They feel like they shouldn't take insulin because they're not eating. But yet, in fact, they need double the normal amount. And then they go into ketoacidosis because having insulin levels too low is one of the main drivers.
Right. Well, so I think that's a big one. And that, they're targeting, a year from now or so to have that kind of release. So this isn't 10 years down the road. This is pretty soon. So stay tuned. All right. Some real world data. And what that means is that instead of kind of a clinical trial in a fake clinical trial setting, real world data is people using these devices out in kind of their free living from the Medtronic 780G. So that is Medtronic's recent new hybrid closed loop system. And they have some really impressive results for people that have been on this for a number of days, weeks, months, et cetera. Where their time in range overall was really impressive. So you want to talk about that pump a little bit, that system, Steve, and then we can get into some of the data.
Yeah, I can. In short, for years they've been talking about the 670G and the 770. Very similar. They get kudos for being the first hybrid closed loop, but there were a lot of issues with it, which they clearly acknowledged and they improved upon. And this database, they took over 7,000 people in their database, and they looked at people on the 770G, very similar to the 670G, and they converted them over to the 780G that used a new sensor. That was one of their issues in the old days. It was the Guardian 4 sensor they used, and they showed an improvement in time and range from 73% to 78% in a short period of time. Their time in range. Their time in tight range, 45% up to 53%. And I'm going to ask you to comment on time in tight range in general after we finish this discussion.
Yeah, I think the most impressive thing here is that about 90% of people on this pump got their time in range over 70%, which is our goal. So we're saying 90%, the vast majority on the system are, at target, which is huge. Now, both you and I have used this pump recently to kind of test it out. And as Steve mentioned, it's the pump, it's their sensor now that lasts 7 days. It's also available with a 7-day infusion set. It's something that I'm actually using right now. And I've been really impressed with how well it works. And I think backing up, like you said, the last pump that we had from Medtronic was a 670, which came out in like 2016, something like
2017,
that. So it's been like 7-8 years for an update, and it was needed. And the Medtronic, they were way behind. But now they have a really kind of, I think appropriately aggressive algorithm. The sensor works well. You just have to calibrate it once. So this is something that is becoming a viable option again. And welcome back Medtronic to the kind of, hybrid closed loop space with Tandem and the iLet and the Omnipod 5. Man, some good options that we have.
Yeah, they all have different form factors. Some of the tubed pumps are similar than the patch pump that Omnipod has. But I would say the algorithm works great, and it keeps you in range as good as any other system. And I tell people I've been looping for years, and it was just as good and actually a little bit better. So I had to change my settings on my looping to get just as good. So it's getting used to the form factor, and like anything else in life, you do it once or twice, and it's not too bad.
Yeah. Now back to the study, like you mentioned. So our goal with CGM has always been time and range, keeping your blood sugars between 70 and 180. And now there is this movement of, should we tighten that up? And there's a new phrase called, get this, time and tight range, which is defined as a blood sugar between 70 and 140. And, Steve and I are all for people getting, good control, et cetera. But we think it's a little too early to kind of adopt this as our new metric. Our concern is that people, aim to keep their blood sugars between 70 and 140 would likely result in more hypoglycemia, and not a lot of data, really no data, that, being between 70 and 140 is better than between 70 and 180 in terms of long-term complications, these things that we really care about. And Steve, you and I know well those patients in clinic that, they want perfect normal blood sugars. And those are some of the hardest patients to treat because they're always just got their foot on the gas to, lower their blood sugars, and they want their A1C to be 5. I think it's a little too early to start adopting these tighter targets without real evidence to kind of back it up.
Yeah, and I think it puts undue pressure on most patients. It's a new category that it's hard enough to get time in range 70 to 180. And I do think that I could say a lot of superlative negative comments about time in tight range, but if it's a way to measure how well these systems work, fine.
Right.
You can compare that. And I've told you this before. I think they need to really change and do time in tight below range, because right now 4% is acceptable. That's 1 hour a day below 70. And I think, if anything, they should try to reduce that goal with the technology. And I'm sure that'll come with it. And lastly, I'll say that we all know or should know about the iLet. It's one of the latest, but not the newest hybrid closed loop to hit the market. That system, is working on a dual hormonal system, as you know well, Jeremy, where you got your foot on the gas with insulin, but you also have brakes now with glucagon. So once we get systems like that, or maybe a more faster on, faster off liquid insulin that works as fast as Afrezza and turns off as fast as Afrezza, I think time in tight range will not be a real reality. We're still trying to get CGMs on people that don't have it.
Yeah, and people are still confused about what time and range is, so if you're listening 70 to 180, we're not going easy on you guys. Like, there's data supporting this is a good, safe range for people to be in. So for now, that is still the gold standard. So
let's talk about teplizumab.
Yeah, so we're leaving kind of tech behind. Now we're going into medication. So teplizumab, aka Tzield, what is it? We've done a whole podcast on this, The Science of Type 1 Diabetes, which is, I think, still our number one listened to podcast. Check it out. Real quick, it's a 14-day IV infusion that we can give to people that are at risk of developing type 1 diabetes. They have 2 antibodies positive. They generally have a family member with type 1, and this drug has been shown to delay the onset of type 1 by about 3 years or so. It's been approved now a year or two. But to find these patients is tough because you have to screen them for antibodies. They don't have type 1 yet. So this drug now has been available, and they presented for the first time data on who these people are that are getting this drug. And there's been about 200 people now that have gotten this drug. And things you want to say about that, Steve?
Yeah, I want to say that it's been a long time coming to see the first disease-modifying drug approved by the FDA. And if you could imagine that 80% of people, including you and I, who came down with type 1, do not have a family history. So it makes screening so difficult. You go to someone that's can't even spell the word diabetes, typically an orthopedic surgeon, but they don't know what it's like. They don't have the symptoms. But I just want to mention the benefits of being involved in a study like this. Even if you screen and you don't have the antibodies, or if you screen and you do, you get so much knowledge that if and when you ever develop type 1 or a loved one, they're ready. They're not in shock. The family goes into emotional stress. They get thrown into the emergency room that you have to get knowledgeable about diet, exercise, testing, CGM pumps, where you have all that knowledge already. And many times it's been shown that anybody that screens for a type 1 study, the incidence of new onset diabetic ketoacidosis that you and I were both in at diagnosis is way down. So screening is important, and with getting people in the certain stage that you mentioned, stage 2, is extremely difficult.
Yeah. So from this data, again, it was like the first 200 infusions, they had data on who these people were. And the important breakdown was that about half of the people getting these infusions were kids, age 8 to 18, and the other half were adults all the way up into their 60s. So you can get type 1 diabetes at any age.
Yeah.
If you have a first-degree relative, you absolutely should get screened. If you are listening and you have type 1, tell your friends, but mostly your family, that they should get screened. There's lots of places they can go. We refer people to this type1tested.com website. It gives you different options, and many of them are free in terms of how to get screened.
Yeah, they have home kits you can buy, and all you need is a drop of blood. If you're worried about your kids getting their arm poked while they're sleeping at night, you go in with a little finger sticker, you prick their toe, you just need a drop. You mail it in. If it's positive, then they'll want you to get confirmatory tests. And by the way, at our Big One conference this year, mid-August in Paradise Point, San Diego, we're working on getting kits there for people that are first and second degree relatives or want to take a kit and bring it home to their loved ones who
That's
are
awesome.
at risk.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
That's great. So that was, kind of exciting data. And by the way, all these things that we're going through with these big presentations, people, up on a podium and in front of a packed audience. So it is kind of cool to distill this down. Hope you guys are enjoying our breakdown. So continuing on in medications, not a new medication, but some new data on that, and that's for Afrezza.
Yeah, I'll just say that Jeremy and I have been using Afrezza for a long time.
Let's tell people what it is.
Yeah, they don't know.
No.
Gosh, and you know what? I take it for granted. Thank you. Afrezza is inhaled powdered insulin. It comes in little cartridges with different doses. Great lecture by Jeremy in our Type 1 video vault on how to use it. It snaps into a little device where you put it up to your mouth and you inhale it. And the key features of inhaled insulin is not avoiding the shot, but that's always nice because it's approved for Type 1 and Type 2. It works really fast. But also, I think one of the most important features, it gets out of your system really fast. So it's great for attacking postprandial elevations without the delayed hypo. But a lot of people use it for meals only, and you'll describe a little bit this.
Yeah, so the study, it was called Inhale 3. And what they did is they took 122 Type 1s, and they basically wanted to ask the question, could Afrezza kind of handle a meal better than somebody not on Afrezza? And people not on Afrezza could be on their pump, their hybrid closed loop, the injections, whatever it might be. So half the patients got randomized to Afrezza, so they had to be on Tresiba, and then they would take Afrezza for meals and corrections. And the other half could be on whatever they were on, shots, hybrid closed loop, etc. They brought the patients in, give them what we call a standardized meal, which is usually like an Ensure or a Boost, something for them, to drink that has some protein, fat, carbohydrates in it. And then they asked the patients, let's say they were on their pump or their MDI, take, the amount of insulin that you would for these carbs, and they would do the same thing for the Afrezza patients. By the way, the Afrezza dosing, what they do is you would take your regular dose of insulin and you actually double that. And that gets you kind of to what the dose of Afrezza needs to be because Afrezza only comes in 4, 8s, and 12 cartridges. So, for example, if you normally would take 4 units of Humalog, that would actually be 8 units of Afrezza. That's important that we can't harp on enough that if you are going to use Afrezza, the dose is actually kind of like double. But anyways, when they did this and they gave people either Afrezza or their usual care, Afrezza really did much better. That they brought the peak blood sugar down by about 20 milligrams per deciliter. They reduced the kind of total exposure of glucose by about 20%. So really, as far as this one specific meal was concerned, Afrezza did better than even these AID systems, and certainly better than people on MDI and what we would call kind of a dumb pump.
Yeah, to be scientific about it, they measured the area under the curve. They look at the blood sugar at baseline, they drink the standardized meal, and they just follow it over several hours, and they plot the curve. And you guys can't see the graphs we're looking at here in the office, but there was quite a statistically significant difference at the peak, which was like 30 to 60 minutes. And what I'm thinking is that a lot of people who were not on Afrezza, if they're out in the free world trying to adjust their diabetes, they would have to take a correction dose. And that creates a crapshoot if you dose just right. And then you get on the roller coaster. And even if you're on a hybrid closed loop system, which these folks were not, it affects the algorithm in that way. So
and this one thing this study does not address is what about people that are on a hybrid closed loop system and use Afrezza with it. Steve, you and I do that kind of all the time, and a lot of patients do. Because we find it actually works well. Then maybe you take Afrezza at the start of the meal and you can use your pump for the rest of it. This was really just trying to tease out Afrezza versus getting insulin through your fat, an injection. And this inhaled insulin, it just works faster.
And reducing your area under the curve, which lasts several hours, you're going to improve your time in range and reduce your time above range without increasing time below range. That's important. Hypoglycemia was not an issue in this study at all.
And the full results of this study in terms of what happened in people's, A1C time and range over the duration of the study is going to be released at the next big conference, the American Diabetes Association, in June in lovely Orlando. So maybe we will do another podcast after that on the update. So moving on, one thing was we're talking about drugs still. There's a company called Lexicon that makes a drug that's an SGLT2 inhibitor, like Farxiga and Jardiance. But the interesting news here is that they're specifically applying to the FDA to get their drug approved for people with type 1 diabetes with some kind of kidney dysfunction. And this is kind of the low-hanging fruit because ultimately we want to get it available for everybody with type 1. But these drugs have been remarkably effective in preventing kind of destruction of the kidneys or kidney damage, also with heart failure. So starting hopefully with getting it approved in type 1s with this specific indication of kidney disease, and then maybe when we get these continuous ketone meters, et cetera, then maybe we open the door for everybody with type 1 to get on it.
Yeah, Jeremy, you bring back memories that you and I were at the FDA hearing, and we had some pretty ignorant people on the panel. And at that time, sotagliflozin, which is the name of the SGLT2 inhibitor, it was just really indicated for helping reduce time and range. And I do believe that now there's so much data on congestive heart failure and slowing down the progression of diabetic kidney disease. I think they're less afraid of SGLT2 inhibitors. And by the way, for the listeners, the people at AstraZeneca also tried to get Farxiga approved, and it got turned down. And BI, Boehringer Ingelheim, got their Jardiance turned down. And also, it's interesting that some of these SGLT2 inhibitors are approved in Europe.
For type 1s, yeah.
For type 1s, thank you. So it's about time, and this all falls under the category of adjunctive therapies for type 1, which is one of your areas of specialty. So I do think it marks a new time, and I think it's exciting for type 1s to have access to these other non-insulin drugs.
Yeah. And that kind of streamlines into our last drug, and then I'll comment on that too, Steve, is that they presented some data on people with type 1 taking Mounjaro.
Can you say it right?
Mounjaro. Yeah, we were in Florence.
We're in Florence, for God's sake. You had a bottle of Chianti on your podium when you were speaking.
So Mounjaro is a once-a-week injection approved for people with type 2, essentially. It really helps with blood sugars, weight loss. And this study was looking at people that actually took it, a real-world study, not like a clinical trial for type 1, and found that people did really well. Their time in range improved somewhat dramatically. They lost weight. So this all goes back to this idea. We were just talking about, SGLT2 inhibitors for type 1s, which are a pill, of starting to build this momentum of, yes, we always need to control blood sugars in type 1, obviously. We're always going to need insulin to do that. But man, some of these other medicines like Mounjaro or these other, SGLT2 drugs can help with blood sugars, can help with weight, can help with cardiovascular disease and kidney disease. Because, by the way, even in well-controlled type 1s, you get your A1C less than 7, we still have a markedly increased risk of cardiovascular disease that we're just not addressing with insulin. Again, Always need insulin, God bless it. But I see in the near future, we'll have multiple other non-insulin drugs approved for type 1s. So it becomes an algorithm similar to type 2s. When a type 2 comes into our clinic, Steve, we're thinking about all the different drugs and things that we can combine. I don't think we're far off there in type 1 of insulin plus.
Yeah, insulin plus. Well, two things. On our recent TCOID Live, we talked about weight loss. You said a great fact that's even on the Instagram clips, that us type 1s are as heavy as the general population. 30% of us are at a higher weight than we should be. And there's similar data with semaglutide, also known as Ozempic, benefits in type 1. That data was recently published. And the last thing I'll say is that, these drugs improve your heart and kidney health, both GLP-1s and SGLT2s. And although there's not large studies, long-term, what we call cardiovascular studies, and even renal studies in type 1, the pathophysiology of heart and kidney disease is supposed to be similar enough in type 1s and type 2s that they expect a benefit if and when those larger studies are done, which are quite expensive and take years to do.
Yeah. And so, when I was speaking at the conference, it was on this topic of wheat and insulin resistance and type 1 diabetes. And my ears are still ringing from the standing ovation of,
Well, give us a couple highlights, please. Seriously.
Well, my talk was really kind of in this area that, again, type 1s, we are actually insulin resistant, that we need to take a bunch of insulin to control our blood sugars, about 2 to 3 times more than we would need if it was coming from our pancreas. So since you're diagnosed, you're injecting these high amounts of insulin, and that might have bad effects. It absolutely increases insulin resistance, meaning that your tissues aren't as sensitive to the insulin as they should be. And that has downstream effects on cardiovascular damage, weight gain, et cetera. So my whole kind of thing was, yes, blood sugar is important, but even if we put everybody on the most beautiful hybrid closed loop pump and everybody's A1C was perfect, we'd still be dealing with weight, hypoglycemia, cardiovascular disease, and that's where these other medications can really help.
Yeah, I've heard you speak on this topic, and every time I hear you, there's more and more data. And for my whole professional life, up until recently, heart disease type 2s.
Yeah.
Insulin resistance type 2s. So now you gave me a couple more things to worry about. I really appreciate that.
Well, listen, so that's kind of the end of our list. But, we walk away. I mean, this is a significant list of kind of big advances. And we didn't have to really dig to find these. It was hard to pull out. We left some things behind, is what I'm saying.
We left things behind,
there was
definitely.
A lot going on. It's fun to be at these things. There's a lot of people, a lot of smart people working on diabetes, type 1, type 2, obesity. These advances, it's hard to keep up with them, and that's why we have to go to Florence every once in a while.
Yeah, well, next year, I believe it's going to be Amsterdam.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you in the red light district, Jeremy.
Yeah, well, now that marijuana is legal here, I don't have to worry about you so much going crazy anymore.
Well, listen, that was really fun, Jeremy. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks again for listening. Please do all your social media things, like, subscribe, all those kinds of things, follow, share, etc., so we can continue to do all this delivered to you for free. So take care, everybody.
Cheers.